Well, last year, Africa came together for business. The Africa Free Trade Area Agreement was signed by partner states. Now, one of the effects of COVID-19 is that it has made countries rethink the sources of their commodities because of the impact this pandemic has had on global transportation system or the logistics system. Now, according to Bank of Uganda, the country sourced most of its imports from within the African continent, specifically the Comesa region. But we'll be discussing that and more in our subsequent shows. It's Man and Markets. I'm Charles Pod, your host. Welcome to the show. One of the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic is the likelihood of a sour relationship between the landlords and tenants. Today we pick the mind of a lawyer to find out how best can this relationship be mended so that issues that are likely to happen are avoided.
So it's nice to have you on the show, Man and Markets. Briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Ashab Arnold, and I'm a lawyer.
Following this current situation between landlords and tenants that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, what does the law say about these verbal agreements?
Well, first of all, we have to understand an agreement. An agreement is a contract. It's just an agreement between two parties where there is an offer and there's also a consideration. I can give you an example of someone gives you a room in an arcade in exchange for the rent money. So that makes a contract. The law doesn't specify whether that contract should be written or oral. So I would say yes, COVID-19 is an act of God. The fact that force majeure, most people say if you're going to rely on it, that you did not pay an area or a rent, just because there was an act of God, let's say a pandemic, then that pandemic should be in the tenancy agreement. But some people don't have tenancy agreements. Now, if I don't have the tenancy agreement, am I being protected by the law? I would opine yes, you're being protected. The fact being that Section 64 just talks about a contract, whether written or not. Yeah, that if you are unable to execute it because of the act of God or because of something beyond your control, let's say a government restriction, then you're not compelled to specifically perform. Reason being, you're being frustrated. That is under Section 66 of the Contracts Act. You're being frustrated in the sense that you no longer have any means to pay the rent. So you cannot be, in that sense, you cannot be compelled to pay.
Still, between these two parties, the landlords and the tenants, what are the likely problems or scenarios that would come out of this?
I think we have already seen some of them. Some landlords are vehemently asking for the rent that these people have been accumulating. Well, they may be right in a sense that if I had an area before the pandemic, strictly I must pay that money. I must pay that rent. But if I have been frustrated during the period I don't have any area before pandemic, let's say before May, I don't have any area. And because of the pandemic, I'm unable to pay. Yes? You shouldn't be asking me for that money. So these people are, the problems that are arising are that they are asking for the money. Some have started asking for that money, like the legal process. And even some are threatening. Some they have locked their property in. So those are the likely things that we're supposed to see. People being chased away, people thrown on the streets, people's property being locked inside the buildings, and many others.
But since you said that this COVID-19 pandemic, it is something from God, so when you look at the landlords, it's not also their will that COVID had to come.
True.
That's why we're still seeing a conflict of interest between these two.
Yeah, none of the parties, neither the landlord or the tenants, are the cause. They are not the ones that brought the government restrictions, and they are not the ones that brought COVID-19. So under Section 66 still in the Contracts Act 2010, it talks about it talks about frustration.
Okay.
Where the two of us have been, let's say one of us has been frustrated, then we have to terminate that contract. Let's say if I'm the landlord and one is the tenant, and such a thing happened, I'm supposed to terminate the contract in a sense that I move out of your house. Yes? But I'm not going to move out of your house because the president said no.
Okay.
These people shouldn't be moving outside the houses. They should remain inside until the COVID is over. So the landlords are being hit all sides in a sense that they cannot demand for the money and they cannot chase away these tenants. Yes.
So, Kanzo, from where you sit, what would be the best way to handle the landlord and tenants issue in this COVID-19 between these two party situations?
The best way to handle this, first of all, it would be the tenants and the landlords sitting on a table and they negotiate. That look here, I'm not the cause of this pandemic. I'm not the cause of these government restrictions. I'm not the reason as to why you're not earning. So therefore, let's sit together and we see what we can do. That is one. Two, the parliament can come out and enact or make laws or a law that talks about such that gives a way forward after this pandemic, or even during, that gives a way forward during this pandemic. Thirdly, apart from those two, even the court, if court has such a precedent, if they can make such a precedent, let's say, I heard that Kasita filed a suit. If we can have such a precedent that talks about such a pandemic, then it can also address such an issue. So that could be the best way forward now, though there may be also others.
Thank you so much for that light. It was nice hosting you on the show. It will always be a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, last year, Africa signed a free trade agreement. Now, this agreement is meant to make trade across the continent smooth and easy. Today, many African countries find it easy to trade with others, let's say in the Middle East or Asia, than fellow African countries. We find out some of the issues brought to the fore by this agreement and why it's so critical for this economy, or the continent, so to speak. On 7th July last year, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was launched during the 12th Extraordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union in Niamey, Niger. An important aspiration of the agreement is to promote trade among Africa's 55 countries with a market of 1.2 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. As with regional blocs like the East African Common Market and COMESA, the promoters of this market initiative are keen on eliminating trade barriers that at times make it easy for African countries to trade with others outside the continent than fellow Africans. In this, the potential that the continent portends is expected to be released.
It is the most integrated regional economic bloc in the African continent. Studies have shown that, in fact. Trademark East Africa just conducted a study with the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa, which indicated that if Eastern Africa, that includes East Africa and the Horn of Africa, were to remove the tariffs as far as recommended by the Continental Free Trade Area, would see an increase in welfare gains of over $1.8 billion. And they would see an increase in trade in that particular region of over $1.1 billion. And the big result also is we would see an increase in jobs of over 2 million jobs would be created in this area. So there is huge impetus that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area should be implemented so that there is actually free movement of people and goods.
The Continental Agreement envisages elimination of import duties, removal of non-tariff barriers, with the aim of boosting African trade by 52.3%. But there are certain non-trade ingredients that are urgently needed for this to happen.
Yeah, politics, of course, is a key facilitator of trade. You can't, a lot of these agreements are being signed because of political will. even bring together the East African community was the political will of those presidents that decided we will therefore trade together. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area has been based on the political will, so you can't separate politics from trade facilitation.
The experiences from the smaller trading blocs like the East African Common Market, SADC and COMESA, however, highlight the Herculean task that lies ahead for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to be fully actualized. There's been accusations of institution of non-tariff barriers and lack of political will in regional trading blocs, which should ideally be stepping stones or major inspiration points for the Continental Free Trade Area. Tanzania has in the past, for instance, been accused of barring Ugandan sugar from its market, while Kenya has been recently accused of stopping Ugandan dairy products from the Kenyan market. In the end, a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of persons and investment would be desirable. Question is whether the political elites are on board, for it largely depends on this class whether this initiative works or not. Let's now take a very short commercial break. Money&Markets continues after this break.